Хотелось бы, конечно, чтобы помощь была.
Of course, I would like to see assistance, let us say, not only verbally, not only in words, but also in concrete terms. For example, in this case, if we are talking about missile and drone strikes, in terms of protecting critical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, and we need additional missile defense systems. Let us first look at what Russia is doing here. Russia, of course, without receiving a proper response to its actions within the framework of international law, within the framework of, let's say, specific logistical actions on international institutions. We do not see, for example, that the UN Security Council would somehow actively comment on these five-fold strikes on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, with numerous destructions of thermal power plants, transformer stations, and so on. So Russia, without seeing all this, of course, it continues to tries to exert such a psycho-emotional impact which should repress Ukraine, should depress our partner countries, which should draw a conclusion. Look, Russia has a lot of different weapons, they have a lot of missiles. We should probably make concessions and so on and so forth. So Russia's motivation is absolutely clear. There is no punishment. We can destroy the civilian infrastructure of a neighboring country. We can carry out strikes, including overflying the territory of NATO countries. This, by the way, is another task that Russia periodically solves. To see how provocative its actions are, to see to what extent these notorious red lines for NATO really exist. And the second component is to exert considerable pressure in order to say in parallel in the media that we are preparing large offensive operations here, we are assembling 2 new armies here, and so on, and at the same time to strike with drones and missiles. Look, we also have a lot of weapons, we are reproducing missiles, as much as we need to. We've got zircons flying, daggers. All of this together should lead to such a collapsed and depressed state of Ukraine, which will be ready to recognize, in fact, the Russian demands that they are making. That's their motivation. Once again, there is no proper response, and there is accordingly nothing that can be done specifically here and now. And what can be done specifically here and now? Now we move to statements by the President of Ukraine, who says, look, an additional 5 Patriot systems will allow us to protect ourselves. And why Patriot? You understand perfectly well that this is the only system that is extremely effective, including on the policy that Russia applies and the hypersonic weapons with the same zircon, the same dagger, the same onyx they use. 5 or 6 Patriot systems will allow us to close down finally our sky. For example, the south of Odessa from the same Onyx missiles, to close down Kharkiv from the same ballistic missiles, and accordingly the center of our country, Dnipro and Zaporizhia, so that the cascading destruction of the Dnipro hydrogeneration power plant does not continue. Here, in principle, roughly speaking, this statement is good, and we see that European partners are increasing their aid, and that is good too. But there are specific things that can and need to be done as quickly as possible. Which are they? I emphasize again, it is immediately logistically arranged transfer of more air defenses and missile defenses to Ukraine, and additional missiles that will work effectively. I stress once again, will work primarily on hypersonic and cruise missiles. They had an opportunity to raise the degree of anti-Ukrainian hysteria against the background of the terrorist attack in Crocus City Hall. Again, they have been given the opportunity to carry out certain raids in certain social groups, primarily migrant groups and so on. But in the medium term, all of this will lead to collapse problems in Russia itself. Because look, the terrorist attack in Crocus and the subsequent events showed firstly that there is indeed a tough confrontation, a growing confrontation between migrants and the indigenous population of Russia. Second, it showed the failure of the law enforcement agencies, which are not prepared to take preventive action against potentially radical groups that are really ready to commit terrorist acts. The third showed that Russia is absolutely certain to blame everything on the non-existent Ukrainian trail, and thus again tried to mark its failure and incompetence. And accordingly, they force at the conclusion and confrontation on the line of Russia versus migrants will increase with the number of migrants, because Russia is trying to compensate for the shortage of labor force through this simple as it seems to them, and very effective as it seems to them too, of attracting migrants from the former Soviet Central Asian republics of Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and so on and so forth. But the second thing is that I have no doubt that radical Islamist groups who have looked at the behavior pattern of Russian security forces, at the reaction to this terrorist attack that you and I saw in Crocus City Hall, will, on the contrary, stimulate these radical groups to work more intensively in Russia, that is, to increase the amount of terrorist pressure within their concepts and so forth. Why will they work on the territory of Russia? Look, it is clear that terrorism, it is global, it is beyond borders and so on. They would probably like these terrorist groups to work in France, Germany, Italy, the US and so on. But there are law enforcement agencies in those countries that are really actively prepared and engaged in monitoring work, analyzing which potential terrorist cells could be planning some actions one way or another. Accordingly, the security forces are engaged in preventive work. What did they see in Russia? On the contrary, they have seen that it is completely safe to plan, implement, and so on. Russian security forces will not react to this, and then it will be all blamed again on the Ukrainian trail, and thus these are very simple tasks that can be implemented in Russia. Plus, informationally, it will look like Crocus City Hall. It will look shocking, and accordingly, it will be possible in this country, in the Russian Federation, to sharply increase its activity to manifest certain terrorist goals. This is what awaits Russia by large. And Russia itself will go, well, I emphasize once again, the unpreparedness, incompetence and unprofessionalism of the power structures. Russia itself will follow the path of artificial conflict creation, migrants, the Russian population, and on the other hand they will always try to accuse Ukraine of something. Everyone will realize that this is ridiculous. It is absolutely clear that in Crocus City Hall there is not even close to a Ukrainian trace there, because, you know, the latest statements, I am of course amazingly pleased by them. When the investigative committee, their representative comes out and says, look, people who professionally committed a terrorist act, who committed it as efficiently as possible, if we can say that about a terrorist act, which is well thought out, everything was done up to the moment of entering the entertainment center. This is actually the event that we saw in Crocus City Hall. The killing with small arms, then the fire, then professionally went out in order to then completely change the model of behavior to be an absolutely ridiculous one, to go to the war zone, supposedly trying to get to the center of warfare. They don't know the names and so on and so forth, but they know exactly that they have to go with suitcases to get money across the battle lines. Do you realize the absurdity of this? And it is clear that this absurdity will sort of characterize the power structures of Russia for terrorist cells. They realize that there are no more ridiculous law enforcement agencies today, and therefore it is possible to carry out large-scale actions on the territory of Russia. This is what all this leads to. Europe could strengthen the sanctions regime, but doesn't want to. Well, because money doesn't smell. We know very well that there are a lot of people, including those who have passports and citizenship of European countries, but who make money on defense transit, on exports and imports of goods to Russia, and from Russia through Belarus. We see these recent scandals, which really allowed to raise the issue of, for example, transit or rather imports of Russian grain and mineral fertilizers to the territory of European countries through Belarus. Well, as soon as it became known, they started to think, let's introduce a prohibitive duty. Look, even now, when it is clear that Russian grain in large quantities, much more than Ukrainian grain, goes through Belarus to European countries, the discussion, and it will be discussed in European Union for a long time to come, is not about banning it automatically, just physically banning any transit of such cargo or any import, or rather such cargo into Europe through land corridors. We are talking about imposing a prohibitive duty, a 50% duty, nothing more. Well, that is roughly speaking, people want to make money. Many people do not care about them at all. The war, on the contrary, allows you to get a premium segment, to get additional premiums, risk premiums. Accordingly, either sell more expensive or buy cheaper. In Russia, many people are doing this very well now. They try to make money on certain lines of goods from the Russian Federation or by selling something to Russia to circumvent sanctions. Once again, receiving premium income there. That is 100, 200, 300% more than it would be, for example, under normal conditions, when Russia would not be an aggressor country. Demanding that these people stop earning money will not work. Will they look for workarounds? Yes. Do we need to work around the sanctions by strengthening them? Of course. To do that, you have to agitate for these sanctions, name specific companies. But all this, you know what it all comes down to. All these sanctions boil down to one very simple thing. Anyone who wants to circumvent the sanctions can always say, wait, we don't understand. You forbid us to sell something in Russia, but there are officially 1,000 companies with European jurisdiction working there. They just officially enter the market and sell food products. So anything, leather goods, I don't know. I think all kinds of goods are sold in Russia today. Yes, there are restrictions. Someone leaves, but many companies stay, and accordingly, many people who are far from understanding the nature of this war, who have citizenship of other countries, who are interested in making profits, they think, wait, and these companies are working. Why can't I work? And so on. So you know, when this dualistic approach is not corrected, then accordingly we will not be able to answer one of the key questions of this war. What is the key question of any war? It is the resource endowment of the aggressor country. That is, where does it get the money from to finance the war? How much money does Russia put into the war every year? The third year of full-scale war now, from 250 to 350 billion euros or dollars. That's a direct appropriation for the war. Where does it get the money from? It makes it from companies that operate through taxes, that operate in its market. That's it. And circumventing sanctions for Russia is fraught only with the fact that they cannot directly receive dual-use goods, well or undesirably military goods directly. They have to look for those opportunities to circumvent. So they pay, I emphasize again, a 300% premium. If they bypass them, you get microchips for the production of the same Iskander-M or Caliber missiles, and they pay a premium accordingly. But on the other hand, Russia earns the money for the war legally. Here it sells crude oil, they sell grain, mineral fertilizers on the global markets. Rosatom in general actively consults many European countries and sells both raw materials and Rosatom technologies there. I mean, within the framework of nuclear technologies, peaceful atom, and accordingly, plus the companies that operate on the consumer market in Russia. These are direct taxes, of course taxes that go to finance the war. So we are playing this game, pretending that we do not understand. We understand everything here, of course. On the one hand, it always looks very strange to me. Again, on the one hand, our partners are always looking for some way to finance us. You started with this. Mr. Borrell says that we will help Ukraine, increase the volume of aid and so on. On the one hand, you are looking for an opportunity to give additional resources to Ukraine to buy, for example, the same shells, or to buy missiles, or to pay social transfers, because our economy looks a little different today due to the strikes on the entire infrastructure. On the other hand, your companies are financing the war against Ukraine with their taxes. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, right? One hand gives, the other hand takes it away. So it will be an endless process. In my opinion, we should have come out a long time ago and said, look, from now on, all companies are subject to these fines for working in Russia. Roughly speaking, if you don't want to just say ban them from working there, then since they work there, there will be some serious fines for their head offices, or they will lose jurisdiction of a European country. I think that many companies will realize that it is not profitable to work for Russia. You just pay taxes there, and here you pay penalties, which means that your profits go into negative numbers, so they will leave. This is something that needs to be dealt with, of course.